Hi, I'm John Lent, City and State's Managing Editor, and this is Last Look. Yesterday I spoke with Janet McEneaney, president of Queens Quiet Skies, a coalition concerned about airplane noise at LaGuardia and JFK airports. And you started this group, I believe, in 2012 due to concerns over airplane noise in Queens, specifically from LaGuardia and JFK. But could you give me a little more specifics about your concerns?
Sure. I live in a neighborhood that I would think of as the boonies of New York City, where I shouldn't even say this, but we don't even have alternate side parking regulations. It used to be really quiet. And we used to sometimes, see airplanes. If I was sitting in my backyard, I would see them. They would be high up. I could barely hear them, and that was fine. And then all of a sudden, one morning at 6:03 one morning, in the late spring, early summer of 2012, I was awakened by the sound of airplanes coming very low over my house, so low that you could read the markings on the planes. And at some points, they were coming every 20 seconds over my house in the same track over and over and over again. This was totally new for us. And it wasn't just me, it was hundreds of people wanting to know what happened. Throughout the summer, our elected officials, Senator Tony Avella, State Senator Tony Avella, Assemblymember Ed Braunstein, and then Representative Steve Israel, Representative Grace Meng, started asking the FAA what was happening, what was so different. This is not stopping. We had an entire summer of, it sounded like we were living in a war zone. And the FAA was not forthcoming and gave us a lot of different stories, none of which sadly were actually true. And basically they stonewalled, and so did the Port Authority. And somewhere, I remember being at a press conference at the end of August of 2012, and it occurred to me that it couldn't just be our elected officials. We really needed to have a group of some way of showing how unhappy the community was, because I have never seen an issue. I started a civic association many years ago where I live. I've been a member of Community Board 11 for quite a while. I have never seen an issue that galvanized our community like this, the way this one has done.
Now this issue, I think one of the big things is a so-called tennis climb, that coming out of LaGuardia, there's a tighter pathway that planes take as they're leaving. And that supposedly could open up more flights to come out of JFK, but maybe it's concentrating the noise over a specific set of houses. And is that the main issue?
There's two different issues in that. Okay, and I will try and tackle both of them. I have to explain to you that a year ago, the only thing I knew about airplanes was how to buckle my seatbelt. And so I'm not an expert, but I can tell you that as I understand it, the planes would take off on runway 13 at LaGuardia going south. And in the old days, in the days when I saw from my backyard, I saw little planes in the sky, that was because they were going south. They were turning over Flushing Meadow Park, turning back north. And so by the time they got over areas that were very heavily populated, they were high up and they had some altitude and they didn't bother anybody. I mean, we live in New York, we know there's going to be planes. We live in Queens and we definitely know there's going to be planes. But this was different, and what was happening was they were starting to use something called a next-gen flight procedure. And next-gen is a GPS-controlled flight procedure the FAA has developed since 2010. And what it does is it takes off runway 13 south, and then it just goes due east. So instead of going out to Flushing Meadow, turning around, gaining altitude, now what we have is the planes take off. You can sometimes see them from my porch, even though they're 5 miles away. And they just keep coming over our house. In the old days, the pilots used to be able to say, well, I think I'll go a little this way, I think I'll go a little that way. When NextGen is GPS controlled by satellite. And so they make a lane in the sky. That's Bob Whitehair's expression, who's the vice president of our organization. They make lanes in the sky where they never had them before. And so what people, the FAA would like you to believe, because I've actually heard them say this, is that now it's not very many people who are going to be affected. Only these poor little NIMBYs, these people who can't take it, can't take the noise. There's going to be who are underneath those lanes. And one of the first lanes was this tennis climb.
And it's called the tennis climb because it goes around Arthur Ashe Stadium?
Ah,
right?
this is a great one.
Okay.
It's called the tennis climb. Each one of them has a 5-letter protocol. So we have, like, I think there's one like Goldman, and there's one that's Jutes, and there's one Coney or something for Coney Island. They name them whatever they want to name them. This tennis climb started out when David Dinkins was mayor. And what it did was, during the tennis tournament, instead of going out over Flushing Meadow and coming back, Mayor Dinkins asked to have the planes go due east so that he wouldn't have to have airplanes over the tennis stadium when he was watching the tennis tournament. So they used it 2 weeks out of the year. We knew it was coming. We knew we were going to have noise during the tennis tournament. Now they use it. First it was 18% of the time, then it was 25% of the time. Now it's a lot of the time.
But there are benefits to this, right? That you can be more precise, it can be more fuel efficient, you can get more planes traveling closer together because you have more precise technology to know where each plane is. And there are real serious issues at the 3 airports. They have some of the worst delays in the country.
Right.
I mean, how would you answer that? What would you see as a path forward here?
Okay. Well, the part that I kind of left out is that the reason that they're really using the tennis climb right now, and we suspected this, and we finally, someone in the FAA actually told us this last summer, is that it separates in the airspace, instead of the planes going as far south as Flushing Meadow Park now. They are now leaving that airspace open, leaving space for more flights on runway 22 at JFK. So the real reason that we have this tennis climb is probably not for fuel economy or delays. The real reason is that they can get more passengers on the runways at JFK. Now, to answer your next question, the question you just asked me, we are all for progress. This is the 21st century. We know we are not going to have the Wright brothers come back anytime soon. But what we are saying is, although we are interested in fuel economy, jobs, and reducing delays, not at our expense, not at the expense of about 500,000 or 1 million people on the ground. And what we think is that all of these procedures have been planned out, and the only people who have been left out of the planning really is the people who are paying for it, who are living here, and who are the most affected. And so what we're saying is that we think we should be part of the planning. We think that we should be considered.
Mm-hmm. So you're not opposed to next-gen technology, you're not opposed to runway expansions necessarily, you just want to be part of the discussion and
part
have
of
a say.
an equal part of the discussion. Now, in other areas of the United States, communities are an equal part of the discussion. Every place, there are 4 things that every other large community in the United States has that we do not have in the New York, New Jersey metro area when it comes to aviation. And why we do not have them is a pretty interesting question. I do not have the answer to it. We have never had what's called a community aviation roundtable, which they have every place else. So every place else where they're instituting these next-gen procedures, they have a roundtable in place which operates under a written agreement, which is on which is represented community people, airport operators, politicians, municipalities, and the FAA. And they work together on work plans that they have agreed upon. For example, San Francisco, Oakland, LAX, Boston, Chicago, all of those places, Louisville, Kentucky, wherever they've had these kinds of problems, they have actually worked together to change the flight procedures. In one place, they actually even rotated a runway and changed the location of a runway to avoid the noise. So that's one of the things that we think we could be doing here. Another is to have noise studies under a federal regulation that they've had in 256 other municipalities in the United States. And Governor Cuomo has just directed the Port Authority to do both of those things. And we're very happy about that, and we thank him for that. And he never would have done it without pressure from Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, Representative Israel, Representative Meng, Representative Crowley.
Well, Representative Crowley, he also recently introduced legislation, I believe it's the Silent Skies Act, that would require the FAA to lower decibel levels to a certain level by the end of 2015. Are you supportive of that? Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
Well, I'll tell you how my understanding of it is that it has two parts. And the first part is that they would require them to phase in a little more quickly quieter engines, and even more important, to phase out the older noisy engines on a schedule. They've been required to phase in the quieter engines, but no one's ever made them stop using the noisier ones. That's the first part. And my understanding is the second part would fund noise research on engine noise, which nobody has ever done either. And so sure, we're in favor of that. We really are very happy that Representative Crowley is, has kind of the vision to think about doing these things that nobody's ever done before.
Janet McEneaney, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.